Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in a new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series now streaming on Showtime.
The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another week of Fantasy NBA Today. It's Monday. It's the start of week 4 of our off-season podcast schedule and regimen. It's show 16 of a said off-season, and I want to thank everybody again for sticking with us here through the thick and the thin. The funny thing is, before I even really get into the show itself, I really do like doing off-season shows more. I don't know if it comes through in how I talk on the podcast, but there's something about not being forced to get a certain amount of info into any one show. I just sort of pod until I feel like being done. And we go as deep as we want on any one topic and as shallow as we want on anything else. And there aren't all these constraints every day. Got to talk about this, got to talk about this, got to... Get me out of that nonsense. Give me the freedom of the off-season. I'm your host, Dan Bespers. Thanks so much again for tuning in, everybody. If anybody happens to be new to the podcast, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. And you should know, you can follow me on Twitter at Dan Bespris, DanBesbris. I know this is the time of year where I lose Twitter follows, but I want you, the one person who's considering doing it for the first time today, to be the one thing that keeps it from falling by one more. This is also a hoopball presentation. That's hoop-ball.com. And they are at hoopballtweets on Twitter. I'm giving you guys the big umbrella Twitter handle because in the offseason you want to hear about all the stuff we got going on at Hoopball and not just the fantasy basketball. I have some promo stuff I want to do at some point during today's podcast, but today is intro to Yahoo Ranks. I do love this part of the offseason. So what we're going to be doing here for the uninitiated, I think we've done this the last 2 off seasons. Did we even do it COVID off season? I think we did. And this is easily the weirdest of them after going through some of the data. This is some of the stuff that I've actually researched pre-show. A lot of the shows over the last 2 weeks, while we were deep diving the numbers on some of our lessons to live by, I had done most of the math beforehand, but I hadn't really looked at the results, so we were kind of seeing them together on the show. Whereas this stuff, I've looked at it already, so I already know where the things are pointing us. You guys don't have to listen to me do some remedial algebra on the podcast, I don't think, this week. But the point of it, the point of this exercise, which really, I'm trying to, I've spent all this time trying to come up with a fun, buzzy name for this particular discussion we have that does last usually for a couple of weeks. But it doesn't really matter what we call it. What it is what matters. And what it is we look at Yahoo's pre-ranks and we look at the end of season ranks for those same players. Basically, it's the Yahoo preseason top 100 and then how they finished. And we break it down into 5-player chunks, 3-player chunks, 10-player chunks to get an idea of not only how Yahoo did, but how it impacts draft day, and then how that impacts draft day strategy for all of us moving forward. It's hard for me to convey all of that just in this kind of broad overview explanation of it, but just to serve as an example, Yahoo's preseason number 1 this year was James Harden. And then some bodies moved around at the last second. You know, if you took the draft, Harden was down, or he was up and then he was down, but his preseason mark was 1. So you might disagree with where Yahoo had some of these guys, but this was basically where they had them for the bulk of the preseason. Harden finished this year as number 41 by totals, number 4 by averages. And because this year was so strange, and I've taken this data, 1, 2, I skipped a year, 2, 3, yeah, basically the last 3 seasons I've actually done it for real. So I think this is the third time we're doing it on the podcast. The one before that was sort of like a half-assed effort on my part. I wasn't really going deep into the Microsoft Excel stuff. This is the first year that we'll be breaking down both final ranks by average and final ranks by totals. Most seasons we just went by averages because there were the outliers, guys that played 15 games, and you could kind of just pull that out in previous years. The problem this season, because for one, it was only a 72-game season, so every game missed was a larger percentage of the overall possible totals you could rack up. And because so many guys missed so many games, there were the discrepancies between looking at how guys perform by averages and how guys perform by totals for the Yahoo's preseason top 100 was night and day.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in a new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series now streaming on Showtime.
For instance, and this is me jumping way out in front, I have a running tally among the categories that we'll be breaking down on these discussions. One of them is what I called a live sum, which is basically just a running tally of how much above or below Yahoo missed by. By totals, and this accounts for positive or negative misses. So, for instance, you got to Rudy Gobert, and Yahoo had him at 28. Preseason, he finished at 7 by totals. So he was actually a positive 21, where Ja Morant, preseason 27, he finished at 161 by totals. So that's a negative 134. So that live sum between those two is negative 113. If you do that for everyone in the top 100, the live sum, the total sum for Yahoo by totals was negative 5,249. Meaning, basically, that if you take the average of that live sum, because it's 100 players, Yahoo missed, on average, if you take the entire top 100, negative 52.49, negative 52.5. Yahoo generally overranked players by 52.5 slots between 1 and 100 by totals. By averages, 23.4. That's actually pretty damn good when you consider how easy it is to miss basically anywhere beyond the top 40. It's really easy to miss. So the fact that Yahoo, by averages, their top 100 only missed by 23.5, basically, I would have called that, under most circumstances, a really big win. Last year, 22. So last year they were pretty damn good. The year before that, 24. So, by averages, Yahoo has been, by all accounts, pretty decent. Also worth noting, the live sum for Yahoo was actually negative 21.3 inside the top 70. It only went up by 2 over the last 30 players on that list. So basically what that tells you, not necessarily that they were hyper accurate, but they just missed by about the same amount positive and negative over that stretch. But what I want to do on today's show, that was just sort of a little tease as to some of the things we're going to be talking about as we roll through just an unbelievable treasure trove of numbers. Fear not, people. I will be putting this, I'll probably PDF it so you guys can just read it, on the internet when we're done with this discussion. Maybe I'll do it on Tuesday. I have childcare on Tuesday for the first time in a very long while. Although my child My child ripped my glasses off my head on Sunday evening and shattered them. So I don't know what this week is going to look like for me. Pun partially intended. I really don't know what it's going to look like. I can't see it. But so, I have all these grand plans of like PDFing all the Microsoft Excel stuff I've been doing. I don't know when these things are going to get to you guys because time is short and fleeting, and I have no proper functioning eyeballs at the moment. But what we're going to do on today's podcast is we're just going to talk about what we're looking at and what we're hoping to learn from it. I don't think this is going to be the world's longest pod. I also don't think it's going to be the world's driest pod because this is the one where we sort of say, hey, here's what these things are and here's what they could mean, and then we're going to dive into what they actually do end up meaning. It's fun. I love this stuff. Pardon me, I need a sip of Squirt. That is a good-ass soda right there. Squirt is a good-ass soda. Before we dive in, quick shout-out to our buddies over at mybookie.ag. Just doing a marvelous job with odds on the NBA playoffs. You got prop bets over there. Lots of really good stuff. Mybookie.ag. I would once again ask all of you guys, any of you guys that are considering getting into sports betting in any way, or if you just want to play with someone else's money, hit me up. I have MyBookie prizes that involve real, legit cash for new subscribers to MyBookie. And I know some of you are like, damn it, I already have an account. Well, guess what? If you got a significant other, brother, sister, cousin, aunt, uncle, father, mother, whatever, friend, coworker, barely acquaintance, we can open one up for them. We can get them going. You could even run their account. I don't care. If you tell them, hey, man, I'll run your account. I'll give you half the profits. It's a pretty good deal. Hit me up on Twitter. Just write to @DanVespers on Twitter and just say, Dan, interested in the prize. That's it. That's all you got to do. I'll find it. There's nothing going on Twitter these days. I won't miss it. MyBookie.ag. I'm not even going to tell you how to sign up because I want to make sure you hit me first for your cash. Sheesh. Pulling teeth here. Dan, I signed up already. No! You got to tell me first. All right, so here's what we're looking at here. In this massive Yahoo rank comparison, what I want to do today is go through what are effectively the columns that I'm looking at on my Excel spreadsheet, which is, for your purposes, the data. These are the categories we're going to be looking at and what we expect to learn from them. A few of them are very quick and painless. For instance, column 1 is the name of the player. Guess what? That doesn't really matter for the math side of things. It actually does matter for the handicapping side of things because there might actually be something about X, player X, whoever we're talking about, that carries over season to season. So player does matter overall. From the sheer numbers standpoint, it doesn't. But as you're taking this data towards next year, you do actually want to apply it to the players. Starting rank, this category actually doesn't matter at all. This is just Yahoo's preseason rank. I set up the top 100, 1 through 100, in the order Yahoo had them listed. Straightforward, easy, nothing you guys got to worry about there. The next column is Yahoo's final rank by totals in 9 category leagues. Everything that we're going to be breaking down over this next little bit is going to be 9 category leagues. So by totals, which means that it does include number of games played. We have a column called average over the last 5, which is basically a running tally of how far Yahoo missed. This isn't even how far they missed. This is a running tally of what the final actual rank was of those guys. So it's just telling us, okay, like what this last 5 players, what were they generally ranked near? It's not a super instructive category, and it's probably why I forgot exactly what it stood for a moment. For instance, if you look at the first 5, the first piece of data you're going to get on this one is after the 5th ranked player, which is Steph Curry. But the guys leading up to him were Harden, Doncic, AD, Towns, and Curry, who had the final totals rankings of 41, 25, 140, 33, and 2. So the average rank of those 5 guys by totals was 48. But of course, that was dramatically pulled down by Anthony Davis missing half the season. Not that Harden, Doncic, and Towns didn't miss their fair share of games, but if you pull out AD and you plug in, say, Giannis instead, who finished at 16, then suddenly your average 5 there drops to like 15 or 20 instead of 48. But again, not super important. Where things start to, in my opinion, get a little bit more instructive are the next few columns. This one, the difference, which is an easy one. We are just subtracting the final rank from the starting rank. And the reason you do it in that order is because I want a negative number to represent where Yahoo missed by drafting too early, and a positive number to represent where Yahoo actually had them ranked too late, a player that turned out to be of value. Not necessarily that you say, hey, you were ranked too late, but hey, maybe this guy turned out to be a steal. I also probably should color code those because maybe we can go find some of the guys we had targeted. Hint, hint, Chris Paul, positive 28. Arguably the best first few round pick. Up there with like Vooch, positive 26. Middleton, positive 24. Gobert, plus 21. Things of that nature. So you find these big positive numbers early. These are big damage doers. You'll see some much larger positive numbers in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 100s range because there's more room for them to grow. Like Chris Paul, he got drafted at 35. A plus 28 is almost as high as he could possibly go. Sorry, he's drafted at 33. Whatever. The next column is the absolute value of the difference, which, for those that are big into math, you're going to find the next 45 seconds to be somewhat annoying. But for those that are not big into math, the absolute value doesn't care which direction the miss was. The absolute value is best represented by, in your mind, picture yourself standing in a room, and you're just counting off the paces to some other object, but you don't care if it's in front of you or behind you. Normally, if something was behind you, you'd say, oh, I have to walk backwards 5 steps. And if something's in front of you, you say, I have to walk forward 5 steps. But the absolute value is saying, well, how far is it? I don't care where it is. How far is it? The answer is 5 steps. So the absolute value is something we're learning because now we want to know, well, look, Yahoo might, let's say, and this didn't happen. I'm sure we could find a place where it actually did happen. Oh, here's one. Pascal Siakam and Chris Paul. Siakam was pre-ranked 32. He finished at 58. That's a negative 26. Chris Paul, as we just mentioned, preseason 33, finished at 5. That's a positive 28. Those two players back-to-back had a total running sum of plus 2, which by all accounts is saying, wow, Yahoo killed it. Over 2 picks, they missed by a total of 2. That means on average, they only missed by 1 over those 2, except we can look at it and say, well, they didn't miss by 1. They missed by 26, and then they missed by 28. So that's why the absolute value is actually really interesting, because now it's telling you, okay, well, how far was the actual total miss? It shouldn't be the case that, here, let's go find another instructive spot. Here's a good one. Joel Embiid, preseason 15, finished at 17. Bradley Beal, preseason 16, finished at 14. So that's a negative 2 and then a positive 2. Great. That adds up to 0, meaning over those 2 picks, the difference was 0. That says Yahoo nailed it. By the absolute value, it was 4, which is pretty damn close to 0. Either way, you can argue Yahoo nailed it. But the fact that that total miss of 4 is basically the same as the sum, the non-absolute value, the actual sum of the miss was 0, and the sum of the Siakam-Paul pair was 2. Those sums look really close, but the absolute value sums, one of them was 4 and the other was 54. So the absolute value is saying, look, we're going to give Yahoo more credit when they miss by 4 total absolute value as opposed to 54. Because adding the -2 and +2 together looks a lot like adding -28 and +28 together. Looks the same. It comes out to 0, but the absolute values are quite different. So that running tracker doesn't care what direction you're walking. It's just giving a what's the total miss. And it's always going to be bigger than the sum miss. But now you're sort of adding in what are effectively the sizes, really, of the positive, of the wins. Because Yahoo shouldn't get credit for missing under and then missing over. It reminds me, I watch The Price is Right fair amount. It's on in the background when I work in the mornings here. It's a lovely game if you like math and grocery shopping. And I like both of those things, or I used to before a pandemic. But I'll don't worry, I'll get back into it. They have a game on The Price is Right where the contestant has to guess the price of 5 grocery items, and if the total of the 5 numbers that they give is within $2 on either side, meaning a $4 window, of the actual sum of those 5 items, they win. That doesn't take the absolute value. So there's actually an advantage in that game to them missing above and then below and then above and then below, because it sums towards 0. But that's not as instructive for us in these exercises, because if Yahoo said that somebody, and I mean, it gets more severe the farther down the board you go. For instance, and there's a perfect example here. Julius Randle was preseason 80. He finished at 16 by totals. Gallo was 81. He finished at 145. That's a positive 64 and then a negative 64. And Yahoo, in this respect, if you weren't doing the absolute value, if you were just doing the sum, that's a 0. That looks like Yahoo just absolutely drilled it, crushed it on picks 80 and 81, when in fact, they were terrible. They missed by 64 2 times in a row. It just so happened they missed to the right and then the left. Burp. They just stood right in the middle and whiffed by the exact same amount in each direction. That's not a win, and it shouldn't look like a win. Hence, absolute value. Now, just for thorough sake, we do have a live sum of just the difference. So that's why I was talking about when you add it all up. We also have the live absolute value sum, which I think is, again, a more a number that carries a bit more weight. And then we also very easily here had a running live average and a live absolute value average as well, which is, in this case, you're just dividing the running sum by how many picks you are into the draft. So, for instance, after the first 10, the live sum was negative 298. The live absolute value was 324. You divide those by 10. And you can do it at any juncture after 11. It was so-and-so, and blah, 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 blah. And when Yahoo gets one right, when they nail it, those live averages and the live absolute value averages should actually come down. It should shrink. As those numbers shrink and grow, they do tell us, how is Yahoo doing? Here's the problem. The running live average can kind of cheat a little bit. For instance, as you get deep into the draft, like on a Julius Randle, say, even though that was a 64 slot miss, it actually made the live average look better because it was just a big positive number that got thrown into a big negative number. Well, not a big positive number. The negative number was 4,052, and then you added 64 to it, whereas for the absolute value, the number before that was 5,066, and then you just added 64 to that. And it was roughly 75 or 70, 80 and 81 picks into this thing. So by adding 64, you actually it still looks good. It actually slowed down the growth of the live absolute valuing. Colin Sexton actually helped it quite a bit. But that kind of stabilized it. It was like, oh, well, we're generally missing by about 64 at this juncture anyway. So here we missed by 64. That's expected. On the live average, that's not absolute value, it actually shrunk it from a negative 52 slot miss to a negative 50.5 slot miss, which is insane because, as we just told you, it was a 64 slot miss. That should have made that number go up. Another good reason to like absolute value. We have a per 10 category that rolls into the live average, and then an absolute value per 10 as well. And this is one of my favorite ones. And again, I'm on this podcast, we're just going through what each of these things is for. The per 10 is kind of like earlier in the show, we talked about the last 5. This is the last 10 absolute values. And this one is actually really interesting because when you look at these last 10s, you can see where the Yahoo pre-ranks got better and worse. When you're just looking at the total, the running total, it generally just gets worse over time. You can't see the little miniature fluctuations in it. So, for instance, this year, first round was actually really bad. The second round was actually better than the first round. And the first half of the third round, if you combine the second half of the second round and the early third round, was actually an area where Yahoo did pretty well this season. And then it just got terrible and really never veered off of terrible. Until somehow they had a not awful chunk in like the 95 range. Inexplicably so. I would call that almost dumb luck. That Yahoo was like not that far off from Mikal Bridges through Rashawn Holmes. Like 84 to 92. They were not horrible. It's like, oh, well, that's weird. Yeah, it is weird. It's weird. And we'll point out anomalies and we'll point out where we should look at it. We're also going to do the same thing with average ranks because I felt this year, more than any year that I can remember, the difference between the total rankings at the end of the season and the average ranks at the end of the season was stratospheric. And you can see it in the numbers. It does bear itself out. The live absolute value average miss by totals after the top 100 picks, Yahoo was missing, on average, after 100 picks, by 67 slots. 5.5 rounds. On an average basis, not by totals, on a per game, the miss was only 39. So 3 rounds and a little bit of change. That's huge. And there are all these little bumps along the way that point to this weird discrepancy. And we'll go through all of them, probably in chunks of 10, just to really get a nice feel for it. And kind of to tease it, because I don't want to go a whole lot deeper on today's show. We're already a half an hour into talking about how all this process works, and we didn't even mention the playoffs. I might save that stuff because we did a Friday show that was very heavily focused on playoffs. However, congratulations to the Los Angeles Clippers, who advanced past the first round after a hard-fought battle with the Dallas Mavericks. And congrats to the Brooklyn Nets and the Atlanta Hawks for winning the first game of their second-round series over the weekend. I do have thoughts on those. I'm liable to put more of them on Twitter. I really wanted today's show to focus on how we're going to break down these rankings, because this is the big stuff for us. We're fantasy players. But I will say that I think you could get a pretty good price on Philadelphia for the series price right now that we know Embiid is playing, and we also know that Philly is started to figure things out a little bit in the second half against the Hawks, and I think they'll probably get their bearings. I also think the Bucks are oh, crap. I need to make sure I got my timeline right here. They're playing Brooklyn's favored by 1.5. I think Milwaukee does bounce back, and that last one, only 222. Yeah, that's gonna be a higher scoring game this time around. Milwaukee took 101 shots in that game, and nobody got to the free throw line. You're going to see more free throws. You're going to see more made three-pointers on the Milwaukee side. Milwaukee in the over, I'm looking at for this one, which I know is a little bit public, but I don't really care on the over. Milwaukee's actually not that much of a public play. Money's already, unfortunately, driven that line down, so it's just not quite as juicy as it was a minute ago. But to finish up our thoughts on sort of the intro to this Yahoo rankings discussion that we're about to dive into for a number of shows, if you look at the first 10 players, and I broke this down into groups of 10 just because it's easier to do division from 10, 20, 30, etc., instead of 12, 24, 36, and so on. At the end of 10, by totals, thanks to the fact mostly that Anthony Davis missed half the season and was ranked 140, the live or the absolute value last 10 miss was 32.4, and by average it was only 20. I mean, that's a pretty big jump. And there's sort of similar stuff that happens throughout. Like the second round by averages was actually pretty freaking good. But we'll be picking out all of these little tidbits as we go and trying to isolate where that total versus per game stuff was a COVID season anomaly and where it's something we need to focus on quite a bit as we look towards future seasons of fantasy basketball. Let's talk playoffs on Twitter. We'll go ahead and do that over there. I am at Dan Besbris. You can follow me that direction. Again, it's DanBesbris. Tomorrow, we'll start breaking this down. Groups of 10, and whatever we want to talk about, we'll talk about. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but we'll get it. We'll get through that. We will build our strategy for drafting the following season off of another year of delicious preseason to end of season data. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you had a lovely weekend. Enjoy your Monday night. We'll talk to you first thing tomorrow morning. So long, everybody.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in a new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series now streaming on Showtime.